Welcome to The Definitive Wrap, where we report the truth about American exceptionalism. We love our flag, we love our country, and we believe in America. The Definitive Wrap, where we respect people of faith, the men and women in blue, and our support for Israel. And now, your host, Bela Seabrow, on The Definitive Wrap.
Hello, welcome to The Definitive Wrap, and I am Bela Seabrow. We thank VNews for hosting our show. Today we have a very special program for you, the politics about hush-ups. And at The Definitive Wrap, we seek truth and we expose the truth and corruption. We respect justice and the decent people who make the world a better place. Because these are the people who protect and defend what is right and just. It used to be back in the day that when a child would complain about an adult being inappropriate, the viewpoint was not to believe the child, and that children live in their own make-believe world. How horrifying that must have been for children who were victimized. Not only that, but the old-fashioned mentality was that the Rabbi or teacher is always right. It had gotten to the point where children knew they might as well keep quiet about inappropriateness that was perpetrated against them because no one's going to believe them anyway, or they might just get punished for even saying something. So they went through life bearing the pain of their abuse. I have spoken to middle-aged adults who have shared with me that in specific schools and yeshivas, there were students who knew who the perpetrating educator was, and they knew to watch out for that person. Fast forward several years later, when the Frum Society became more savvy and actually uttered the words sexual abuse if their child was victimized. And they would scream and try to bring the perpetrator to justice. But if we follow renowned stories, we know that things did not go well for those families. And not only was justice never served, but the family was ostracized for daring to accuse a so-called respectable person of abusing their child. Well, we have come a long way since then because an educator of children said enough is enough, and risking his own self and family, he started going after perpetrators and calling them out. I am talking about Rabbi Horowitz. Rabbi Yakov Horowitz is the founding dean of Yeshiva Darchei Noam of Monsey and director of Bright Beginnings. He is an innovative educator, author, and child safety advocate. Rabbi Horowitz is the author of 2 books. He published child safety books that are in over 120,000 homes in 3 languages, as well as the groundbreaking Bright Beginnings, Gemara, and Chumash workbooks that are in over 100 schools. Rabbi Horowitz conducts child workshop, abuse prevention programs, and parenting workshops in Jewish communities around the world, and he received the prestigious 2008 Covenant Award in recognition of his contribution to Jewish education. Rabbi Horowitz, with the greatest honor and respect, I welcome you to The Definitive Wrap.
It's a pleasure to be on your show, and I hope everybody finds it educational and helpful.
Rabbi Horowitz, you are a trailblazer in education and child abuse prevention. And you not only set out to understand the issue of child abuse, but you're finding ways to keep kids safe. Please share with our audience what compelled you to rock the boat, so to speak, in the educational system.
Well, I started out my career in education 40 years ago, starting with teaching in 8th grade, which I did for 15 years. Most of the years I volunteered for the children who hadn't been successful yet in learning, like I was as a kid that age. And because of that, I just wound up dealing not only with the X's and O's of the learning of the children, which eventually wound up becoming those Chumash and Gemara books, because I felt that the children, many of the kids just didn't have the skills that they needed to learn how to learn, rather than just being taught by rote. But I also with the social emotional piece. So I wound up spending a lot of time helping families, helping parents help their children outside of my classroom in the broader Jewish community. And one thing led to another. I wrote a book an article, in 1996 in the Jewish Observer called a Pound of Cure, which was an ounce of prevention and later a pound of cure. It was about, I basically said, look, we're losing a percentage of our children to religion and to emotional happiness. It doesn't have to be this way. Here are some of the things we could do. And the roof came off as soon as the article was published. We got hundreds and hundreds of calls to our home every month. The Aguda ran, the Jewish Observer was flooded. And together with the late Rabbi Moshe Sheraz Zatzal, he was very brave and bold and started a program for teens at risk. It was the first program of its type called Project Yes. And I was honored he asked me to lead it, and we started it together. Unfortunately, he passed away just a few months afterwards. And we did that, I've been running that type of work for 25 years now. But like about 2002, 3, 4, it started dawning on me that a very large percentage of the children we were working with had been sexually abused. And it just came to me, I can go through the details, but it's not that important. I just realized that that was the case. And I just started looking into it. And once I saw that it was so, I started writing about it. And when you look back at those articles, I was writing then primarily about this in the Jewish press, and I could almost hear the panic in my voice, during those first couple of years, like, folks, look what's going on. And most people just thought I lost my mind.
Right. I would expect that the reaction wasn't positive at first.
Yeah. And by the way, it's not the Jewish community. It's like that.
Still not.
Anywhere. How many people really believe that Bill Cosby did what he did? You grew up with him, you watched the show for 20 years. You just can't believe that people can do something like this. I know this guy. It's called the halo effect. There's a lot of literature and research to support why that happens. There's a theory of the just world. We don't want to believe that we live in a world like this. We don't want to live in a world where people can abuse children and not get hit by lightning. So in fact, I just did 2 talks in the 5 towns last week in the 5 towns in Far Rockaway on 2 successive nights. And I was talking about those barriers to understanding what's going on. And it's important to understand that when this happens to us, when we feel that can't be, and that disconnect and the disbelief, that we understand that that is part of the process. It's part of the process of getting used to this information. And unfortunately, similar, is of course not the same thing, but just like we go through the 5 grieving stages, God forbid, when someone dies, with denial, anger, bargaining, you can hear that same, the Kubler-Ross model of those 5 stages of grief. You can almost hear people going through that cycle when they say, oh, it can't be. And then they get angry and they say, how could it happen? And so, we need to get to the acceptance. And thankfully, at the beginning, it was very difficult. People really didn't believe it. But as time went on and we became more sophisticated about understanding it and dealing with it, eventually, I started to think about how to stop it. So how can you prevent this from happening? And clearly education was by far and away the number one tool that can be used to help parents help their children to understand what's going on. And, I went to Art Scroll, Rabbi Meir Zlotowitz, God bless him, he should be benched in Gan Eden.
It's amazing that they were supportive.
He took that book 13 years ago. And, I'll never forget it when I walked in. His son, Gedalia Tzalangiyaran, who runs Art Scroll today, I was his junior counselor in Camp Monk a lifetime ago. And, we go back a long time. And so I know Rabbi Zlotowitz. I went in to pitch the idea to him. And I always say it was one of the nicest rejections I ever got in my life. He said, Rabbi Yankee, this is such a beautiful idea. I love it. And he opened up his drawer, took out a checkbook, and he said, I want to be your first donor.
Oh, wow.
So I went like this to him.
I could imagine.
I pulled my glass. I'm sorry, what?
I mean, I could imagine. I mean, your reaction must have been like, "Are you hearing
I went
things?"
like this. I looked at him. I said, Rabbi, you know, I didn't come to you for a check, right? So he says, Yankee, I can't do this. You know, we do svarim, you know. So I think there was a fundamental misunderstanding. How should he know? I told him it's not sex education. It's about space. It's about I said it's the ultimate tznius. It's the ultimate book of modesty. It's teaching children about their personal space and that they have a right to protect it. And no one's what is more modest than that? I said, look, Rameh, I said, I'm going to make the book, and then I'll come back to you.
Wow. Wow.
That's what I told him. I said, I'm sorry?
I said, it's amazing. It's amazing.
I said, it'll probably take me a year or two. But once we start doing it, you'll see. I'm not even going to bother explaining because I don't expect you to understand it. I did research on this for 2 years, you know, asking experts, Jewish and the secular world, like, how can you possibly stop a large adult from taking advantage of this little defenseless child? What can you possibly do to stop this? And it turns out that education is extraordinarily effective. The research shows that it's so effective. I'll be glad to explain why it's effective, you know, for parents, because I think it's an important piece that parents should understand why it works. So if you're interested, I'll be glad to explain why that's so. But by and large, we did the book, and thank God it's in about 80,000 homes already. And then we did a Yiddish version. Believe it or not, I worked with the community in Kiryas Yael in Monroe, the Satmar community there. We did a Yiddish translation together with them every step of the way. I told them, it's not about me. I want to make changes so that it'll be culturally congruent for your community. We worked together for a year, and they took 7,000 books. They have one, every family got one, you know. So, and then we did it in Hebrew for 2 versions, for the Haredi community and for the Modern Orthodox, the Dati Leumi community.
Right. Rabbi Horowitz, it's very scary for parents. They send their children to school or camp, and rightfully so, they expect that their child will be kept safe in all aspects. In your professional experience, is there a particular profile of a victim that makes the perpetrator deliberately target him or her? I'm asking because in various situations, it can be just one victim in a classroom while everyone else has no problem with the perpetrator and saying, like, him, no, I never had a problem. This person who's claiming whatever they're claiming is lying. They say he's a wonderful person, and there's no way he would ever do such a thing.
Right.
So the same with sex crimes perpetrated against adults. What is the perpetrator looking for when he or she targets a victim? Is it a certain vulnerability that they detect and they feed on? Like, how could this be prevented? How does somebody prevent from becoming a victim? What type of profile do they have?
That's really the most fascinating part of why it works. Right. But I just want to point out, you know, while a Walder situation, or, you know, a Weberman situation where the people are, you know, supposed to be protecting children in the education field, they get the most headlines, and they are unfortunately serial pedophiles who abuse God knows how many children during the lifetime. It's much more common to be less high profile. In other words, people in the family, people in that, in those the first 2 of the concentric circles around the children. You know, that's the irony, is that we're concerned about stranger danger, as we should be, and we're concerned about educators or people in public life, and that's all very important, but it's not. The majority of the cases are within a family, or friends of the parent, you know, friends of the family, people on the block, kids, you know, adults that children know well. That's just important to point out, you know, because the headlines, if it's, God forbid, a family member, you know, the research shows that they're least likely to be reported, which is understandable. You know, people don't want to destroy their homes, and you know, there's for a lot of reasons. Right. But it's really universal. We shouldn't think that it's only a summer camp, and it's only a school, and it's only a shul, or anything like that. It's really, it's universal. And the reason that it works is because, and again, nothing's perfect, and it's really important to point out, Bela, that this is a piece of a larger child safety a concept where supervision and, with the level of supervision needs to be different than it was before. Kids going to a sleepover, you have guests at home. There are so many different parts of the thing that,
Yeah.
My generation, I'm 62 years old, my generation, we didn't, my wife happened to have been pretty keyed into this when our kids were young, but, people didn't think like that then. So it is to a great degree generational, but we have to think differently about every single aspect about it. But the way it works is that the abusers are evil and just horrible creatures, but they're not foolish, or they would have been caught right away. So most of them are, in a very evil way, brilliant at figuring out who they can abuse and get away with, which is what you were alluding to. Rabbi, that's what you were suggesting. What's the profile of the children?
Yeah.
So that's what you were suggesting. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what they do is, what the abusers do is they go through a process called grooming, where they try to figure out, there's really two goals of that. First of all, is they try to figure out which children they can get away with abusing. And the research shows that the two items, the two things that they're looking for or concerned about is, number one, knowledge, education, and number two, connectivity to family. So, I give an example of, let's say, someone doing a financial scam. Okay, if somebody's selling phony lots in a new development that doesn't exist. So who are their marks? Who, a young couple right after they're married, let's say, that has money but might not have financial, wherewithal, not wherewithal, knowledge of what a scam looks like and what to look for. So and they look for isolation. So an elderly widow or widower, or a young couple, they look for people who are not knowledgeable and people who are isolated. And what they do is, if they had that contract, right? If I'm trying to scam you, Bela, and I don't know who you are, I don't know your family, I don't know your background. So I have a contract that I'm asking you, if you give a $20,000 deposit, you get 50% off the price. That's the gig, right? I don't know who you are. I don't know your family. I don't know anything about you. So that contract, in all likelihood, if I tell you, if you respond to an ad and I say, hey, let's go out for coffee, let's talk about it. That contract could get me 20 years in jail, if in federal prison, if you turn it over to the wrong person. So in all likelihood, I'm not going to bring that to our first meeting. I'll sit down and talk to, tell me a little bit about it. Bela, we have a beautiful mortgage system. Do I need to explain it to you, or are you knowledgeable? And if you say, oh, my family's in the mortgage business, or, I was in real estate, I was a real estate broker for a while, what's going to happen, Bela? We'll finish the meeting and I'll say, I'll meet you next week and I'll never talk to you again, because you're not someone that I want to start up with, because you know stuff. And even if you are, God forbid, socially isolated, even if you're not knowledgeable, I need to know who you know. Because if a spouse or a parent or a sibling or a friend of yours is in law enforcement or mortgages or real estate, you'll discuss it with them. So I go through this process that sometimes takes a long time to find out who are my best marks. Again, if someone is extremely reckless, they'll come and try to get that check from you the first time, but they get caught right away. The evil ones, the Walders of the world, don't do that. They're cunning and they go through this process. So here's the point. Here's the great news. So parents, feel empowered. If you train your children to be knowledgeable about their right to personal space, about the fact that no one's allowed to make them feel uncomfortable, no one's supposed to touch them in a private spot. So, and you talk to them regularly, they find out that those children are not in the category of kids they want to mess with. My number one recommendation to parents, by the way, there's a phenomenal article by Malcolm Gladwell, the guy who wrote Blink and Tipping Point, and it's called In Plain View. It was New Yorker magazine. It's a 5,500 word essay. He does a masterful job of explaining grooming and going through examples and of how they do it. And I read many books on the subject, including a doctor who went around for 20 years. She went to prisons interviewing serial pedophiles and asking them how they got away with it. But that kept jumping out. Naivete and lack of connection to parents.
Rabbi Horowitz, the old adage of no good deed goes unpunished certainly has applied to you too. You've had your share of battles and antagonists because you went after perpetrators. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, look, I had, some of the advocacy I took was unpopular in certain circles. The first case I really got involved with was the Nehemiah Weberman case, which was, I got an enormous amount of pushback and death threats and all kinds of stuff. But I obviously I reported them to the police. I did what I had to do to protect myself and my family. But you just got to do, ultimately you have to. I feel you got to do what's right. And I wasn't going to stand down because of any threats. And I was sued about 7 years ago. I was sued by a sex offender in Israel named Yonah Weinberg. He sued me for slander, for defaming his great reputation. He's a registered sex offender in New York. So whatever, that went to trial. Thank God we won it just recently. It was a 5-year ordeal. But again, you can't back down. You have to do what you have to. I believe that it's my job, my moral responsibility to do what's right. Mostly in terms of educating children, but when people push back against spreading information about pedophiles, we can't stand down. We have to just do what we think is right. But to me, it's all about education. Really,
right,
it's
right,
every
knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power. Now it's just that simple. And when parents, it's interesting. There's research that shows that if parents are anxious when they speak to children about this, the children can't absorb information. We can't absorb when we're in fight or flight. When we're nervous, we don't remember things people tell us. So I never walk into classes and tell scary stories. I do the cardigan sweater. I don't walk in with my long jacket and then my hat on. I just walk in and say, look, folks, I'm going to teach you how to do this. It's really straightforward, and I'm going to empower you to be able to do this to your children. So we made this book, the child safety book. We designed it in a way where there are no scary images. Quite to the contrary, it's meant for parents to sit down on the couch and have an enjoyable conversation. We purposely lined up the book so there's general rules about crossing the street, being safe and other things. Then we did some stranger danger, and then we in the middle pages are about abuse prevention, but also in a way that's not intimidating at all. And thank God, as soon as the book came out, we were already getting calls from parents and emails thanking us for saving the children's lives. And there was a school, my project now, what I'm doing now, and I am not going to rest till it gets done. We're looking to get a child safety book in every home, in every Jewish home. And we're offering the book I'm partnering with ArtScroll, and we're giving the book, we're selling it for $5 a book, free shipping for orders of over 100 books. And we're trying to get parents, communities, philanthropists, just folks to be proactive and get books into the hands of parents, to give them out at a bris or a party, instead of party favors, to give out books at a upsharing or something like that. And we got many communities who've already, people stepped forward and bought 500, 700 books, 100 books, 200 to get them in the hands of parents. So that's really that's where the action is. That's where we
would you say that sexual abuse of children and teens contributes to the at-risk behavior where they go off the derech?
Oh, absolutely, for sure. I mean, I wrote 18 years ago, I wrote that, of the top 10 factors, the first 4 is child abuse. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are child abuse. It's like an atom bomb compared to anything else. In fact, one thing that's interesting, I mean, I know you mentioned this a few times, the notion, I separate, when I was talking about teens at risk back then, I separated it into 2 buckets. I call it ozvim et hadat, people who abandon religion, but religion only, meaning they have a great secular life, they're in college, they're happy, they have a boyfriend or a girl, have a social life. Unfortunately, God's not part of that life now. So I call that ozvim et hadat, they only abandon religion. And there are so many reasons for that. Kids were turned off, they weren't turned on, they see inconsistencies, or they just want to do their own thing. The second group, I call it Ozumet Chayim, they're abandoning life. They are also abandoning religion. It sounds the same. My kid's not keeping Shabbat or putting on tefillin or anything, but Ozumet Chayim means that they're not in school, they're not happy, they're cutting, they're suicide attempts, they're depressed, they don't want to get out of bed, like their life is on hold.
Right. And
I wrote back then, 18 years ago, that I said that over 90% of that is trauma-based, that is abuse-based. Because they if you study Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they can't get past. If they don't feel safe, how can they move forward? Right. Just what you were describing before. And that's why education is so important, because we can prevent this.
So, as we said, with knowledge comes power, but so why don't the schools and yeshivas and all hashkafic circles educate children on prevention of sexual abuse? And moreover, why don't they have a system in place that a student, can safely go and talk to an authority in the school or yeshiva?
So they do. I mean, most schools, the vast majority of schools have, Debbie Fox has, our book is only for parents. I purposely did it that way because we were starting out and it's just more complicated. It was just simple. I just have to convince one person to buy the book, one parent at a time. But Debbie Fox has a fantastic program that's a school-based program. Shani Verscheisler has great programs. In fact, the Hasidic community in Borough Park translated into Yiddish. One of the programs, the vast majority of schools do have child safety. There are some who don't, and it's very unfortunate. But we're trying to get more and more involved. So certainly over the past 3, 5, 7 years, there's been a total change. And summer camps, I tell parents say, should I send my kids to summer camp? So I say, just call the head counselor or the director and say, what's your child safety program like? Did you train your staff? That's what I tell parents. Last week, a few parents asked me about that. Should we send their kids to camp? I said, you can't keep them under the bed. Right. You have to live life, but make sure that there's training there. And you say, look, I'm going to talk to my son before he goes to camp. What are you going to say during orientation? I said, if the camp director says, oh, thank God we don't have those problems, I said, leave the deposit and get out. Just said to run away. Yeah. But it's not, they really are. The camps that I know of, all of them have, certainly in the English speaking world, they all have, to the best of my knowledge, child safety education programs that are very effective.
Yeah. One last question. We have the holiday of Purim coming up, where drinking is encouraged as part of the simcha and celebration of Purim. I know that you're very outspoken about teens who drink heavily and the dangers of alcohol poisoning and worse, deaths that result from intoxication. What can parents and people of authority do to prevent a catastrophe, God forbid?
Talk to your kids as best you can. By the way, I have an Instagram page. It's my personal page is at Yakov Horowitz, and I'm doing most of my work there. There's also a YouTube page with hundreds of my talks on Purim and other issues. It's also at Yakov Horowitz. And we just started, Bail. I'm really excited. In June, we started daily parenting clips of 59 seconds, under a minute, for today's parents, for their attention span. And the way they work, I opened an Instagram account. It's at Bright Beginnings Forum. You can get all the clips there. And it's all about, it's an education about everything. So I think parents should speak to their children. It is difficult if the other kids are drinking. And I just interviewed on Instagram. I just interviewed Rabbi Heshi Billet from Israel. His shul went alcohol-free in 2004. And I spoke to him about his journey, how it went, and what I think everybody should be doing this. And I keep posting on Instagram and social media and my YouTube pages, education that parents need to know. So I'm extraordinarily upset that that in 2022, with all that we know, that people should offer a drink to someone is whatever. It's just very upsetting.
Yeah. Tell us how, and tell our audience especially, how people can get a hold of your book called The Safety Book for Every Home. How can
Yeah,
people buy it? Where can they find
so
it?
they can pick it up. They can pick it up. It's on our Amazon page. They can go to Art Scroll. Just do a Google search for "Let's Stay Safe" children's book. They can email Stuart, Stuart at stuartschnee.com. He's our publications director. And if you don't mind, I'll send you a copy of our flyer. You can post it, perhaps people can see to buy bulk orders. It's so important. It's so important because we know that this is what saves lives. They can go to childsafetybook.com. Childsafetybook.org. We have they can see the free $5 a book. Folks, it's so helpful. It's so important. Please educate yourselves, educate your friends. That's the best solution by far.
Thank you, Rabbi Horowitz. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for all you're doing for society. You're saving countless lives. May you be blessed with good health to continue your Avodas HaKodesh.
Amen. Thank you very much. Thank you, Bela. Thank you for having me.
And thank you to VNews and to our audience for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to The Definitive Wrap with your host, Bela Seabrow. Be sure to tell your family and friends they also can catch The Definitive Wrap on Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play, and your favorite streaming service. See you next time on The Definitive Wrap.